Welcome into Cougar Tracks here on the KSL Sports YouTube page. It's Wednesday, January 7th, and I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper. It's a BYU basketball game day as the Cougars get ready to take on the Arizona State Sun Devils tonight. 7 p.m. tip on KSL NewsRadio. Pregame at 6. It will also air on NBC Sports Network. If you have Xfinity in Salt Lake, you have that channel. Otherwise, streaming service Peacock is the other option to watch BYU versus ASU inside the Marriott Center home opener for BYU in Big 12 play this season. But in this show, we're starting things off with football as the Cougars continue to retain their 12-2 roster from this past season.
The top story of the day. The biggest story in the world of BYU sports right here on Cougar Tracks.
Retention is king for BYU football. 3 more players announced on Wednesday that they will be locked in or running it back for the 2026 season. Defensive end Kenilau Fonahema, former Springville High standout, heading into his 3rd season with BYU in 2026. He announced he's coming back, and he's a guy that's kind of an under-the-radar, noteworthy return. He was someone that Jay Hill prioritized a lot coming out of Springville. Now, again, you could argue, is he a Michigan guy? But I honestly hate saying that because sometimes you got to ask yourself, are those guys a BYU guy? Because BYU, heavily resourced, knocking on the door of the playoff. Look, I understand the tradition. I understand the history of Michigan. But I think when people say, well, is he really a Michigan guy? Now, I'm not saying all of BYU's players are looking to be poached by Jay Hill. They've got a nice stable of talent at Michigan. But again, I think that's always a little bit of a disservice to some of the players that are inside BYU's program that are really good. I think Kenilau Fonahema got a bright future ahead of him, and he announced on Wednesday that he is running it back. Same with his defensive end running mate, Viliami Puha. He announced that he will be running it back. Obviously, he's the son to BYU defensive tackles coach Sione Puha. And Viliami can play D-end, D-tackle. He can play really anywhere along the defensive line. In BYU's 3-man front, Viliami is a good player for BYU heading into his junior season already with the Cougars. And then also to round out the announced retention pieces on Wednesday, Pop-Tarts Bowl standout Jovesa Damuni, who had the game-winning touchdown against Georgia Tech. He announced he will be running it back. No pun intended there, but Jovesa coming back, and he's going to have an opportunity, I think, to be in the mix at running back. I don't, again, say that one performance in the Pop-Tarts Bowl suddenly says, hey, he's RB2 if LJ Martin does officially run it back. Even RB3, I think that would be a great value if Jovesa's RB3, go get a transfer portal running back, pair him up with LJ Martin. That would be wonderful for BYU. But retention has been huge, and it can't be overlooked how well BYU has done with retention. Like you, I'm a little bit surprised that to this point, day 5 of portal season, as the countdown to this portal window closing on January 16th, no commitments as of now. But keep in mind, again, commitments can happen well beyond the portal being closed. It's just who's going to enter the portal. That has to take place between the 2nd and the 16th. But I'm a little bit surprised that there's no commitments yet. No transfers at all have been committed to BYU during this 2026 cycle. But sometimes you have to remember the best gets are the ones that you keep. And if you get LJ Martin back, that's like getting the number 1 player in the portal type level. Now, running back, maybe you knock him a few spots because quarterback's going to have a higher priority. Still, if you retain LJ Martin, that's as good as anything you could find in the portal and then some. So retaining everyone, for the most part, has been really impressive so far for BYU. And that also speaks to the enhanced resources, the commitment. You still got to wait for some guys with like an Evan Johnson, Shmev, who has not made any formal announcements. He's been reposting on X. Tavion Beasley going into the portal, reposted General Guilford on X as well. Would love to see a run it back post from Shmev because he's an excellent cornerback and he would be really good. But rest assured, though, BYU's got personnel to fill that spot if he was to move on. But we'll see. There's been no formal announcement from Shmev. So until there's an official announcement, he's on the board for BYU in the senior season. But retention is massive. And you have this foundation that's being built by getting Isaiah Glasgow back, by getting Faletau Satuala back, by getting Keanu Tanavasa back. Because any of these guys, if they hit the portal, they would have a list of Power 4 suitors waiting for them to go add those guys and pick them off and get them into their programs. So those are big-time retention pieces. Isaiah Glasgow, retaining him, we didn't talk about it enough because it was at the tail end of the program. But Isaiah Glasgow's retention, that is massive because I felt like this year for Glasgow, and he was second in tackles this season, despite navigating injuries. I had a conversation with him leading up to the Utah game, which you can go listen to here on the Cougar Tracks podcast feed. But I asked him about his injuries, and he just said, like, he didn't want to get into it much, but he was playing through some stuff. He was not at full strength, and I'd like to think Isaiah Glasgow getting back to 100% health, you could see the Isaiah Glasgow being the all Big 12 performer that he should be. And I think you saw signs of that in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. He was getting back to that form, and now you retain him after a defensive coordinator change. That's been impressive. And I think that shows a level up in the enhanced resources that Kalani Sitake has got to build out this roster and being able to maintain guys. I think we talk a lot about how it's becoming a dying breed to have career guys in college football. Yet I find myself seeing BYU producing that quite a bit. I talked to Fesi Sitake during bowl prep about, Chase Roberts. He might be a dying breed of guys that just stay at one college. Why can't BYU maybe be that place? That's the exception in college football. With all these places having mass exodus, why can't BYU be the place that becomes the program that spotlights retention? Because retention is as big of a recruiting win anymore, it seems like, as getting a portal guy. In many respects, because it speaks to these players want to be there. And BYU, I think it's even more noteworthy just because it's a peculiar place. It's a lot different than any other college football campus. And for guys to want to still be a part of that, it speaks to what Kalani Sitake is building. I was looking at the Big 12. BYU has had 10 players into the portal during this cycle. 10. That is the second lowest in the Big 12. The only program with fewer entries into the portal is TCU with 8. But keep in mind, with TCU, they lost Josh Hoover, who's going to Indiana. So you compare the impact of the departures from BYU's 10 compared to the TCU 8, BYU probably is the winner there. Because all the 10 guys that BYU has experienced going into the portal, making public announcements, and has arrived in that portal are all guys that you'd say they were looking for more playing time. It's a pretty common theme in all 10 of those guys. And I think that's the case with a lot of these players. I think so much is overblown about, oh my gosh, there's 4,000 guys in the portal. Look, there's a lot of conversations. We saw it with that former Texas receiver, and look, that's his point of view. I don't know if Sark's made a public statement on that guy's situation. I think there was a Kansas State player too. But guys are sometimes told, hey, this is the reality. You can stay. Probably not going to play, though. I think that's kind of the situation with a lot of these guys. So when people get blown away by, 4,000 players in the portal, this isn't sustainable. How many of those guys are getting maybe cut and asked to leave and take the exit? You got to keep that in mind. And then there's situations like Iowa State, 51 players enter the portal. Oklahoma State, 62 players enter the portal. Coaching changes. How lucky is BYU that they retained Kalani Sitake? You talk about retention. You could have been Iowa State. You could have been that where Matt Campbell is picking off more than a dozen Iowa State transfer portal entrants and taking them to Happy Valley. That could have been BYU's fate, which would have been far worse than a lack of a portal commitment 5 days into the portal cycle. That would have been worse. And I think also of note, too, there's still a little bit of a domino effect waiting to take place with some of these portal commitments. It's kind of like NBA free agency, where when one guy commits to a place, then the dominoes start falling. 23 of the top 50 guys in the 24/7 Sports transfer portal rankings are still available. And those players that command the biggest dollars and probably the biggest level of interest, that then has a ripple effect. When those guys start to go off the board, you start to see more players making movement. So this thing's going to continue to speed up here, and you're seeing a lot of movement already, and that number is going to shrink probably even more by day's end. But I think that at some point, we got to see some commitments here for BYU. But the fact that you've got the roster retention on the heels of 12-2, and then you supplement it with some big-time portal additions, it could be a really good football team for BYU again next season. And where you'll go into next year saying, playoff time, you got to go break through, go get the thing. Because the last 2 years, BYU has been an underdog. They've been the pesky team that everyone's overlooked, including myself. I didn't see 11-1 happening last year. I didn't. I thought 8-4 with a new quarterback. But you retain all this and navigate this portal and continue to run it back and retain the key guys and then supplement it with a few big-time portal additions, you're going to be looked upon to go get to the playoff. Now, it's tough because you see Texas Tech, 18 departures, but 10 commitments, and they look to be big-time commitments that follow the same blueprint of the David Baileys, of the Lee Hunters, in that mold. Austin Romaine, a linebacker, he's going to fill that Jacob Rodriguez spot for Texas Tech. He comes over from K-State. They are getting some big-time, great fits. They're doing a nice job, and you got to go contend with that. Very difficult once again. But I also like what BYU's building from just keeping Anusi Taumoi-Peau, keeping Parker Kingston. Because, again, if these guys hit the portal, they would be probably in that top 50, top 75 conversation among portal entries in the portal rankings, but you kept them. And you stack all those up and then get a few portal additions. This could be a really good football team for BYU in 2026. And then, of course, Bear Bachmeier, and he's kind of a mellow guy. I'll be curious to see if he even bothers with a run-it-back announcement. But, Bear Bachmeier is a guy that's the face of the team for BYU in 2026. And then long-term, Ryder Lyons would be that guy for BYU, the face of the program. And Ryder, he's getting set to head out to his mission. He's going to be serving in Orlando, Florida. And Ryder Lyons is going to be at the Mexico MTC. I'm not sure exactly when he's departing. I think his mission service started January 5th. So Godspeed to Elder Lyons, but good days are ahead for BYU football going forward. But very curious to see when those dominoes officially start falling for the Cougars here in the near future. Let's take a break. Let's get to BYU-Arizona State basketball preview next here on Cougar Tracks. Welcome back into Cougar Tracks here on the KSL Sports YouTube page and KSL News Radio. Every day, Cougar Tracks is coming to you with the latest BYU analysis, intel, information, breakdown here on the legacy home of the Cougars, KSL News Radio and KSL Sports. Love doing this every day, talking BYU. It's just been a blast. I've been doing this now daily since August when we kind of made the transition with the podcast format change, and just loved every second of it and appreciate all of you for subscribing to the show, liking this video. Appreciate you for being on board. So BYU basketball tonight, number 9 ranked Cougars. They finally moved up in the AP Top 25. They are going to be taking on the Arizona State Sun Devils. ASU, not a bad team. I think that just the thought is they're kind of near the bottom of the Big 12. Not that great. And really, they'll probably be near the bottom of the league, I bet. But again, the Big 12 is a gauntlet. There is no team that just is not able or capable of knocking you off. And Arizona State, though, is on a 3-game skid. And they are struggling a bit. And BYU is going to host ASU tonight, 7 p.m. tip, 6 o'clock pregame on KSL NewsRadio and Peacock and NBC Sports Network if you have Comcast Xfinity, which was wild to see that NBC Sports Network is back. That was a channel that was once shut down. Now it's back because NBC added all of this Big Ten, NBA. So they revived it, and it's back with Comcast Xfinity because, of course, they own Universal does. Anyway, that's deep in the weeds stuff. But you can watch. That's how you can watch and listen to BYU-Arizona State. And the big story tonight for the game is the status of Keba Keita. He appeared on the availability report as doubtful on Tuesday night, excuse me. There'll be another update 90 minutes before tip. So around 5:30 p.m., we'll get another update on officially Keba's status. But one thing of note with Keba Keita, it was interesting. He had 11 points, 16 boards against K-State. Then he spoke to the media after that game. I was not in Manhattan for that game. But just kind of rule of thumb, typically when players get hurt in a game, if they do in that game, they're not going to typically speak to the media. So there's been exceptions. I remember Jaron Hall back in the day in football. He gets hurt against Arizona State, coincidentally enough, in football in 2021. And then Baylor Romney finishes out the game. Jaron still goes to the podium and speaks to the media. And we're thinking, this never happens. He must be okay. And then, well, he wasn't okay, and he missed the next few games. Keba Keita, doubtful for tonight. BYU also, Brody Kozlowski out, KJ Perry out, Nate Pickens out, Dawson Baker out. Those are no surprises. KJ Perry officially going to redshirt this season. Brody Kozlowski, though, this was Kevin Young discussing the sophomore from Corner Canyon and his status. We're going to see him at all this year.
The injury is more severe than anybody thought, and so I'm kind of going on what the doctors are telling me to do and so forth. But no, I don't think we're going to see Brody anytime soon.
It's a bummer, and Brody's going 2 years into his college career and just not getting a real opportunity. He's been dealing with various injuries. Hopefully, he can have a speedy recovery, and we maybe see him, next year potentially with 3 years of eligibility remaining. Because at this point, just redshirt him and get him ready for next season. The Keba Keita being doubtful status is intriguing because Arizona State is one of the biggest teams in college basketball, 12th nationally in average height. They've got a really good true freshman in Masamba Diop, 7'1". They've also got a transfer from Oakland, Alan McCabe, who had a monster slam dunk against Colorado. And also in their last game against Colorado, they had their San Diego transfer, Santiago Truitt. He was out for that game. He's not on the initial availability report, so I would expect that he's going to be available. He's 6'11". So they've got a lot of size to throw at BYU, who is not expected to have Keba Keita. When you appear on the availability report in the Big 12 with a doubtful status, there's a 25% chance you're going to play in the game. So, case in point, doubtful to see Keba Keita, but we'll see officially later tonight. But I think that raises some kind of intrigue because how does BYU combat that? Do they go with Hadim Boop, who didn't play against K-State? Or do they go with Abdullah Bidu Ahmed, the former G League center, to get the initial start? I would think that they'd maybe go Hadim Boop just because he's got a little more experience. And I know that the thought with getting Abdullah Ahmed, Bidu, from the G League, that gives more versatility to let Boop go to the 4, which is more of a natural position, even maybe the 3, potentially. But historically, he's always played the 4 in his basketball career. 5 has been kind of new for him this season, but he's got a lot of time at the 5 this year. It'd make a lot of sense to just give him the start and then have Bidu continue to maintain his current role, which he's occupied this season, coming off the bench, get 12 to 15 minutes. Whereas Boop, as we saw against Wisconsin, so we've seen at points this season where Hadim Boop has had a greater role. Remember the Wisconsin game, just days after Keita took a hard hit to the head against UConn and was sidelined after the first 7 or 8 minutes. Keita only played about 15 minutes against Wisconsin. Boop kind of held it down at the 5 spot for BYU, and BYU, of course, won big over the Badgers in that game, who, by the way, Wisconsin has not been that great this season. I don't know if that's going to be that much of a great win, resume-boosting win for BYU as initially thought. Still, Boop is in that stay-ready territory in Kevin Young's bench, and I wouldn't be surprised if he got the nod. But that's the luxury of having Bidu get added. The mid-year addition from the G League is that you have so many more options and versatility for this BYU front court. So that's going to be an area to watch in this game. Also to watch is the point guard battle between Rob Wright and Arizona State's Mo Odom. Mo Odom got high praise from Kevin Young when he was breaking down ASU, and this was KY on the Sun Devils.
They are totally different. They're talented, though. They did a good job finding good players. Really impressed with several of their guys. I think they obviously are super long. Start 6'10", 6'11", 7'1", and then the guard Mo Odom. I mean, he's as dynamic of a guard as we've seen to date. He reminds me more of an NBA style guard that's super electric in the pick and roll, looking for his own shot. I don't think you see that as much when guys are looking for perimeter shots and pick and roll like you do in the NBA. That's pretty much every guard. So they're dynamic there. Bobby does a good job of running stuff to put Mo Odom in actions that, are advantageous to how he plays. Really impressed with their big fella, Giop. I mean, he's just very mobile, super athletic, great size. And then they've got, some requisite shooting around that. So, Johnson's a guy that was a great find. I believe he was an NAIA product that's come in, and he's getting to the free throw line 8 times a game. And so you have to give them credit for, really looking everywhere for players. They got a bunch of international guys too. So it is a totally different group, and impressed with what I've seen so far.
Good breakdown from KY. I love hearing his breakdown and thoughts of opposing teams. I think Kevin Young's very insightful in that regard, just because he's got a wealth of experience in basketball, and I just love his breakdowns because when he talks about NAIA, I'm sure he's got connections at that level of basketball, and he can hit them up and be like, hey, what was this guy like? So KY, his breakdowns of opposing teams are always fascinating to me, because sometimes in the media, you don't want to just resort to, hey, what are your thoughts, coach, on what type of challenges did this opposing team give you? Because that's just such an easy layup of a question, but I think KY sometimes hits those out of the park. Anyway, Mo Odom, though, going to be a big challenge for BYU. He is a good guard. BYU once played him when he was at Pacific in the WCC. Then he bounced around to Pepperdine. Now he's at Arizona State. And he said, oddly enough, that Arizona State was a place that was his dream school. And I think that's kind of cool that he's at a place that he wanted to be at. And I that's always refreshing to hear when you're talking about college basketball players and the movement with the portal. Mo Odom wanted to be here, and he goes to Bobby Hurley and ASU. But ultimately, though, Rob Wright, I think, matches up quite nicely with Mo Odom in that backcourt battle. And this was KY on his thoughts of what Rob Wright has provided to BYU at the midway point of the season.
I think Rob's been unbelievable. I think if you just look at his just raw stats, I mean, he's really bought into the way that we want to play, which we feel like helps guys be a bit more efficient in terms of, their percentages and their offensive efficiency, because of our spacing and the shots that we like to sort of emphasize. And Rob's done a great job of understanding what that is and then being able to carry it over onto the floor. And so I think that's A. B is, he's taken a lot of, I think, the pressure off of Richie and AJ, because he can sort of run the show, but also, put so much pressure on the defense in his own right. And I think that's helped, AJ not have to do as much for an entirety of a game, and it's helped Richie find open shots because of how much pressure Rob puts on the paint, and then they have to overhelp. So it's worked out well in terms of how those three in particular fit together. And then, Rob's experience in our league is also something that I think I've not only have relied on, but will rely on even more as we move forward into conference play.
Such an underrated performance at Kansas State was Rob Wright's. 18 points, really good player for BYU, and I think he's only going to continue to get better over the course of this season, getting into the guts of Big 12 play for this big BYU team that is flying high with a 10-game win streak, looking to get their 11th consecutive victory. I think Arizona State, though, ultimately has no answer for a guy like AJ DeBonsa. I think AJ goes off for another big game in this contest tonight. And again, I talked about it earlier this week on Monday. How refreshing is it, again, to have a guy like AJ where he's going to give you at least 35 minutes a night? I mean, at least. The guy never wants to go out of the game. The only time he goes out is when he's dealing with a little bit of foul trouble for that game against K-State, but he always wants to be there to help his team. And you compare that to what's going on with Kansas, where, yes, Darren Peterson comes in and hits clutch free throws to win an incredible comeback performance at Fog Allen against TCU, but then he doesn't play in overtime. And you're thinking, how is this good? Where the star player, who's probably, I'm not going to say I know Kansas's payroll, probably is making the most money. How is this a good thing? How is this working? Whereas AJ is just delivering night after night. It's been fun to see, and I think it's going to continue to deliver tonight. I think this BYU team also will shoot the three ball at a high clip in this game. I'm expecting BYU to go over 45% from three tonight. It's only happened 3 times this season. Twice in Disney when they faced Miami and Dayton in the ESPN Events Invitational, and then UC Riverside last month. I think it happens again. I think BYU knocks the three ball at a high clip in this one. I think Richie Saunders, too, who at times up and down with the three ball this year. I think Richie has a big game for BYU knocking down the three. Let's get to my score prediction.
Score prediction. Will BYU come out on top? It's time for Mitch's score prediction for the next game.
So since I say BYU is going to be knocking down the three at a high clip, I'm going to say BYU wins big. BYU 91, Arizona State 68. That's my score prediction for tonight's game between the Cougs and the Sun Devils. On the availability side for Arizona State, they have 7 players out of note. Former BYU player Marcus Adams Jr., who appeared 2 years ago in only one game, in that game against Bellarmine. Remember that? He was the former Kansas signee that got added to Mark Pope's team. And then there was a West Virginia injunction that allowed players who transferred twice to then play immediately. Whole whirlwind deal. He plays against Bellarmine one game, and that was his only appearance as a BYU Cougar. Adams played at Cal State Northridge last year, was pretty good. Now he's at Arizona State, more of a bench role, but he is out for tonight's game for the Sun Devils. But again, I think BYU wins big, and then it sets the stage for rivalry week between BYU and Utah coming up on Saturday. We'll have more on that game, obviously, in the days ahead here on Cougar Tracks, but full coverage of BYU Arizona State inside the Marriott Center on KSLSports.com. That's going to do it for this edition of Cougar Tracks. I hope all of you enjoyed it. I'll be back tomorrow with a breakdown of this game and more BYU football talk here on the show. It's all powered by KSLSports.com.